On this episode of Grips Tips here at the Grips Archery channel, I've got a question for you. Do you sight your pins into your bow, or do you sight your bow into your pins? All right, first of all, everybody, thanks for tuning in here to Grips Archery channel. Really appreciate you guys watching the videos. But here's what I mean about sighting in your sights to your bow or your bow to your sights. So and the way I mean this is when you sight in to get your sights to the bow, then you move your pins to the yardages that you want. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of you who set your pins in 10-yard increments. You go 20, 30, 40, 50, or how many ever pins you have. You set them at 10-yard increments, which if that works for you, that's great. But here is what I do. And this goes back to my competitive side when I shot 3D archery in the IBO, and for years and years I shot in the pin class, the original pin class, MBR. But when I started back in the 90s shooting all of the IBO Triple Crowns and the World Championship and all that, and back then MBR was orange stake out to 50 yards, and it was the only pin class. There was no hunter class. There was no advanced hunter class. There was no pro hunter. It was just MBR, and that was it. And then through the course of the years with the different classes and so on, it's changed. Now the max is 45. But what I started doing, and I did the same thing, I would sight my pins in. I'd have a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50, and that's how I would set my pins. And there were some instances, depending on the speed of the bow that I had a pretty wide gap in between those pins. And then finally it dawned on me, why am I always setting the pins to those 10-yard increments? They almost never set targets at exactly 30 or 40 yards. So why am I following this regimented, all the pins have to be at 10 yards? So what I started doing was I started getting my pins set to where I wanted, the gaps that I wanted, and then just shooting the bow, getting the bow sighted into those sights. What I would do is I would shoot the smallest pins that I could shoot. I shot, depending on the bow, I shot usually 4 10,000ths pins, and I would set my pin gap the way I wanted them so that I could get those little pins as close together as I could and just barely see through them. I usually, when I shot, if it was in between yardages, I had trouble shooting between pins. I had a tendency to just hold the next pin a little low, and I always did better with that, especially if somebody put an arrow in the target low where I wanted to hold. Then if it was in between my second and third pin, I'd hold my third pin on that low arrow and shoot at that arrow with a pin that I know was too high yardage wise for that target, and hopefully I'd hit high of that arrow and be right there in the 11 ring, hopefully. So then what I would do is I would get my pin gap set to where I wanted, and I would go out to the bale, and if I wanted my first pin to be at 20 or even 25 yards, then I would move the entire aperture until that top pin was hitting at the range I wanted. And then I would just start walking back and shooting and finding out where those pins hit. So if that second pin was at 28, so be it. If that second pin was at 30, that's cool. But as long as the gap and the spacing was nice and even where I wanted it, and that's what I was after. So then I thought, why don't I just do the same thing with my hunting bow? So I like to have my pins centered, all of them, usually the middle pin centered in the as close to the middle of the aperture as I can get it. And then I space the 2 pins above it and the 2 pins below it so that everything is nice and even and I get the pin gap that I want. And then I go out to the range, and if I want my top pin at 20, which here in Southern Ohio, of the 30 years of bow hunting, I've taken a shot at a deer over 30 yards, I think 3 times in my whole bow hunting career. Almost all of them have been inside 30, and the overwhelming majority have been inside 25 yards. So I want that first pin at about 20 yards. So I move the whole aperture until I get that top pin at 20. Then I find out where the second pin is hitting. If it's 27, it's 27. If it's 29, great, it's 29. I don't care what the yardage is. I just want to know where it hits. And quite frankly, the deer never stand at even 10-yard increments anyway. So I set the pins to the gap I want, and then I just find out where they're hitting. Hopefully I have them set so that the bottom pin is beyond 40 yards. If it's 45 or 46, I'm okay with it. Sometimes it works out. It does hit on a nice, even 5-yard incremental set at 45 or 50 yards or whatever. But if it doesn't, I'm okay with it, as long as that spacing is nice and even and has the gap that I want. And I usually like to get those pins pretty close. I definitely don't want them so wide that I would, if I had to shoot in between the pins, I would have a pin over the deer and a pin underneath the deer and have no sight pin on the animal and gap it that way. I definitely don't want that. So I want those pins close. And so I have 2 bows set up to hunt with this year. One is going to be primarily my ground hunting bow, and the other one is going to be my tree stand bow. And so that I remember what's what, I made a cheat sheet. And so here's what I did. Let's go ahead and and I'll throw the video over top. So here are the pins for my Evo NXT. And this is going to be my primary ground bow. This is the one I'm gonna, when I get in my ghillie suit and sit on the ground, this is gonna be the one that I have. And I have 5 pins. You can see I've got 2 green, a red, and 2 green, and they are set for the gaps that I want. Now let's look at my cheat sheet. And so that I remember what I have done with my pins, I have written the pin number and color coded it so that I have the green pin is in green lettering and the red pin is in red lettering and numbering, so that I can tell at a quick glance, put the tape on the back of my riser so that I can just look down at a quick glance and, I range the animal, or I have ranged a target that's out there, a tree or a leaf or whatever, a fence post or something, so I know the ranges. And then when that animal walks into that space, into that shooting lane, then I can just tell at a glance, okay, I need to use this pin. And so now if we look at my cheat sheet, you can see that this bow is set so that the pins hit at 20, 30, 36, 42, and 50, as luck would have it. So as I set those pins, the bottom pin the gap is just a little wider than what I would like, but I can live with it. And that's why I go from 6-yard increments between the pins to an 8-yard increment. And once it hit at 50, I just let it ride. So now let's look at the other setup. So now this bow is my Carbon Air. This is going to be probably my primary tree stand bow. And this bow is so light. It's such a wonderful weapon to carry because there's no weight to it at all. But anyway, the way I have this one set, and because it's a different bow, different poundage with different arrows that I'm shooting with this one, the pin gaps are going to be different. So on this one, as you can see, instead of 2 green, red, 2 green, I alternate green, red, green, red, green with those 5 pins. And so I have the gaps set where I want. I have the pins centered in the aperture, and I did the same thing. I got it so that the top pin hit at 20, kept moving the aperture back and up and down until that top hit at 20. And then I just started walking back. And as you can see by looking at the cheat sheet here, my pins are set at 20, 27, 32, 39, and 45. So not out to 50, but I'm okay with it hitting at 45. And you know, this bow's just doesn't quite have the poundage that the Evo does, and not as fast. So that's why my second pin isn't out to 30. But I'm okay with it being at 27, because again, you know, if a deer stands, they don't look at it and go, "Oh, excuse me, let me back up to 30 yards for you." You know, they don't conveniently stand at the yardages you need. So this allows me, if it's in between, you know, if it's a 24-yard shot, then I know that I can either hold the deer between those pins, which is not my favorite thing to do. I could probably just shoot it for 20, and when it drops, they'll drop right into it. But I know that if it's 24, and I know that that 27-yard pin needs to be right down at his chest level, and so that's probably gonna score me the hit that I need. So these are how I set my pins, and I guess the tip part is I have sight tape for my competitive bows, and that I can cut the sight markings out, and I cut a section on the edge where there is no writing on those vinyl stickers, and I take a fine pitch Sharpie and I write in the colors that I need and the numbers and the yardages that I need on that Sharpie, and then I just stick that sticker to the back of the riser, and I may throw some clear tape over top of it, a strip of packing tape or something to help protect them from the elements. But I have been known to do the same thing on paper and then just laminate that paper and then tape the laminated paper to the back of the riser. So there's your grips tips on how to take care of that. So as always, guys, thanks for tuning in to the Grips Archery channel. I really appreciate the support, but I hope you really enjoyed this second episode of Grips Tips. And more importantly, I hope that if you take my advice and set your bow to your sights, that you're able to use that to be successful in the deer woods this fall, and you bag that big giant that you've been waiting on. So as always, guys, thanks for watching. Give me a subscribe and a like, and I'll try to keep the content coming as best as I can. So thanks again, and I will talk to you guys next time.